Make no mistake about it. The sustainable world is an industry. It is a business. And we need to recognize that. It's not a bad business any more than oil was a bad business or car manufacturers were a bad business. This is technology. And you talk about, how these things move. Thank God the Wright brothers didn't stop when their first plane crashed. You got to keep going. You got to find ways to, improve it and continue working on it. And even when they were finally able to create that plane that was able to fly across the Atlantic, God help us if they'd stopped there.
Yeah.
It's technology grows, and I think the same thing is going to happen here. It's why I'm not afraid for my grandkids. I think the world's going to survive. I think we're going to find our way to get through this. I think mankind is going to be lifted up because of it. I think our societies will be better and stronger because of it. And we can, even move away from a lot of these fears. Every time something happens in the Middle East, people think it's because of oil. A lot of times it is. So let's take it off the table. It's just looking at things differently and being open-minded to other ideas that maybe you might not agree with right now, but at least be willing to have a conversation about it and not, just think that the other person is horrible for not agreeing with what you believe.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the All Innovation, the AI podcast. Once again, me and Dante are joined by another amazing leader. Today, we are joined by Brian Lindsey, who is the co-CEO at BlocPower.io. Brian, welcome to the show, man. This is going to be an exciting conversation. Get to learn a little bit about how you approach innovation in this ever-changing landscape, man. How you doing today?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Brian, as we kind of take this thing off, what are you hoping that our guests kind of get out of today's episode? What are you hoping that they are imparted with during our conversation?
I think a lot of it is really just talking about the new technologies that are available out there in the marketplace and the lack of awareness of them, and also a misunderstanding of electrification of buildings and what that means to the whole sustainable effort and the lowering of carbon footprints.
I mean, the carbon footprint is a common topic that more and more people in our society are talking about. So how are you guys kind of tackling that big problem, right, with the work that you guys do at BlocPower?
Well, a lot of it is been a work in progress with our company, sort of transitioning through some different technologies that were available out there that we got involved with installing into different homes and different types of buildings. And through the process of that, realizing that electrifying buildings, although it sounds good, it does not always work. And it's important to understand the building itself and how it actually functions in order to realize what the efficacy of electrifying that building is. And instead of maybe looking at it from the standpoint of, trying to make it all electric, or, as we used to say, we wanted to Teslafy every building in the country. Looking at it and understanding that there are a lot of ways to actually reduce the carbon footprint of the building without fully electrifying it, using existing technologies that are available to increase the efficiency of their existing systems. And that's what we need to focus on more. We want to be able to lower the energy costs for people. We want to be able to improve the efficiency of these buildings, and electrifying them is not always the best way to go about that.
Just to catch up our audience, can you explain what electrifying a building even looks like, and what do you mean by Teslafying a building?
Sure. So if you have a building, for example, that was built and designed to use a boiler system, electrifying the building would encompass removing the boiler system itself, putting in heat pumps, whether they're air source heat pumps or water source heat pumps, and making the building fully electric, removing any gas appliances, or gas or oil operated water heaters and putting everything onto your electrical panel. In probably 99% of the cases, when you look at doing something like that, one of the first things you have to do is actually upgrade the electrical system, which is costly and not always what people anticipate when they get involved in this process and looking at, wanting to electrify their building.
This is interesting to me because we're talking about innovation, right? And I think you guys have to do a really good job of helping people reframe what innovation really looks like. Because when you say Teslafy, naturally I'm thinking like a city with flying cars, and we've got wireless electricity that just kind of jumps from object to object.
Sure.
But you guys are talking about making incremental changes that have a huge impact over a long enough sustainable time horizon in the work that you guys do.
Exactly right. You have to look at a building holistically. All buildings are different. They all have their own personalities. They all breathe differently. They all work differently. And I'll go back to the example that I was using before when you talk about a building that was designed to use a boiler system in there. If you were to remove the boiler system, do nothing else to the building, and then put in, for example, air source heat pumps, those heat pumps are never going to work properly. You're going to substantially reduce their lifespan because they're going to be overworked beyond their capability. So you have to look at the building, the envelope itself, and you have to tighten it up. You have to put in insulation. You have to put in new windows. You have to find all of the different openings that are part of that building that was designed to use this boiler system. A building that uses a boiler system is a living, breathing building. It has to have air escape in different areas. In many cases, in places you don't even know it's escaping from. It has to have a lot of intake air that allows that boiler to operate efficiently. So there's a lot of parts to it that have to be looked at, and the same goes for any type of, whether it's using a heat pump water heater. You have the same principles involved there. You have to have the building envelope sealed properly insulated, good roof, good windows, and make sure that if you're going to install those heat pumps, that they're operating within the confines of the air that building allows them to operate in.
How are you kind of viewing sustainability and some of these sustainable green initiatives, I should say, with the understanding of BlocPower's original mission from Don Albert of wanting to Teslafy? Was it the world or America?
He wanted to electrify every building in the country. Which is an amazing goal, and Donnell is an amazing visionary, and what he did with this company can never be understated. He sort of forged a path in allowing us to be able to be in a position to look at what the cause and effects of all of this work is. And in doing that, allowed the opportunities to examine these buildings and realize that, we have to go a little bit further. We've got to look for those new technologies that are out there, that instead of removing a boiler system or looking at a building and saying, in order to make this work right, we've got to insulate it properly and put the windows, again, huge costs that homeowners are not, usually expecting to see. So instead of going through all of that process, and instead of going through all of that expense, we look at the technologies that are available to attach to existing boiler systems, which will significantly reduce their fossil fuel usage, make them much more efficient, and consequently significantly reduce the carbon footprint of that building. We also, as a builder, as a developer, we look at all new technologies, but also all new materials that are available out there. When you look at insulating buildings, they now have things like spray-on seals that can actually go on the exterior of a brick building, which do not have a very high R value in terms of insulation, but it's a big improvement. The new technologies that are available for different types of windows, whether looking at saccadic movements of the sun or whether looking at energy producing properties that some of them have. We look at different types of insulations that are available out there that, unlike the fiberglass and the styrofoam insulations, they now have plant-based products that are much more effective, give you a much higher R value, and are much more friendly to the environment. Reducing different types of fixtures in the home, light fixtures, changing to LEDs, and not just to LED bulbs. People don't understand that if you don't address the fixture itself, you're not going to get the savings that you're trying to achieve. Because even though a fixture may work with an LED bulb in it, it doesn't mean that it's going to be efficient. So you want a fixture that's designed to use LEDs. And they're, the way the market is now, they're very inexpensive to be able to get into install into your home. And they're very easy to do as well. We look at all of those different components, your appliances that you use, the high efficiency dryers and washing machines, dishwashers, stoves, the new induction stoves that they have available now, which is an amazing technology, use significantly less energy. Couple of drawbacks to them that you have to adjust to. They have to use a certain type of pot and pan on there. But once you make that transition, they're not only much more energy efficient, but they're also much safer. So especially if you're somebody that has little kids running around, you don't have to worry about them getting burnt on the stove and, all of those other things that have always been a concern ongoing. And you can remove those gas operating stoves, which are emitting, different types of emissions into the air that may not be as harmless as people would think. So it's looking at everything, a holistic viewpoint. And the way that we're transitioning the company to be more of a construction management company, an owner's rep type company, it allows us to get in right at the beginning of the design process and sort of guide that process to ensure that everything that they're doing is looking at sustainable materials, is looking at renewable energy sources wherever possible, or in where it's not possible, to look at how we create the maximum efficiency of either existing systems or replacing a boiler system with a new boiler system that's much more efficient. So it allows us to, again, be able to look at a holistic approach to buildings as opposed to, individual parts of it, just the heating or just the electric, or, we look at the whole building and make sure that as it's being renovated or being constructed, if it's new construction, that they're maximizing these efficiencies.
Have you had to do any type of convincing along this way? Because we've been hearing about sustainability. We've talked about green technology, green energy for such a long time. But my question for you is, do you think that you've got tailwinds behind you? Like these are generational expectations for what the future looks like that puts you guys in a good position? Or what's kind of your 2 cents on where the marketplace is going and why you guys are positioned this way specifically?
Really good question. I do think that the markets are positioning very well to move to a more sustainable construction environment. I think a lot of folks are moving away from the LEED and the WELL certifications and all of those things, because although they do have, there's proprietary portions of them that are very important to the building industry, there's also other ways to do it without having to go down that road. It's really your approach to the construction process itself that really needs to be paid attention to. And I think that people are starting to realize, the general contractors that have been out there for 40, 50, 60 years and have been doing things the way we do them for so many years. And now all of a sudden we're saying, let's try a different way. It does take a little bit of prodding, a little bit of pushing to get them in that direction. But once they see that it's not the fallacies that they believed about sustainability costing more goes away, because it doesn't cost more to build sustainably. To look at ways of putting more efficient systems in there that they think cost more up front, and in reality they probably do. But now look at it from an operational standpoint. What are your savings going to be operationally moving forward? And does it make sense for the project as a whole to integrate something that's going to cost literally thousands to millions of dollars less over the course of, say, 5 to 10 years in terms of your energy costs? So yeah, there is some pushing and prodding that's needed. But at the same time, I think the whole environment out there is starting to change. People are starting to realize we can't continue doing things the way we always have. Whether you believe in that the planet is dying or not, we could debate that all day long. But regardless of whether you believe it, doesn't it make more sense to use sustainable materials? Doesn't it make more sense to use renewable energy sources instead of having to drill wells and find mines and pull materials out of the earth and do all those things that really cost a lot to do? But you do have to balance it. You have to look at all of these things in terms of, their overall efficacy. And it's okay to disagree on some things. Like, for example, the large wind turbines that you see out there. Can't say I'm a fan of them. They cost a lot to produce. They use a tremendous amount of fossil fuels in order to construct them and to put them in place. But what they have done is they've spawned a new industry of turbine development. Smaller turbines that are much more efficient, create much more energy on a per square foot basis. So it's although the technology is there, it wasn't quite as good as it could have been. But now, with new technologies coming out and new companies looking for new ways to do things, it's improving on those technologies. And I think that's very important as we move forward in this industry.
Yeah, all these things are almost like a necessary evil, right? I mean, unless we were there, we wouldn't be here. And kind of looking at those inefficiencies and those large scale systems that people have stood up means there's a next generation that says, how do I improve upon that? And we just kind of followed that tail of exponential improvement over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious, Brian. So for any maybe a developer listening to this and hey, this sounds really good and exciting, but how do I ground this in maybe an example? Do you have maybe an exciting project that you've worked on where you did see a lot of efficiencies gained through going through the model of BlocPower?
Yeah, completed projects, no, but we are in the midst of several projects where we're actually doing this. We have a series of buildings in Syracuse, New York, that are being renovated to a higher energy efficiency, and we're working on some major projects in the city of Chicago right now, a 40-story and a 42-story high-rise that are being converted from offices to residential. And we're going through the design phases on those right now. We're in schematic design, which basically gives us the layouts of the building, how we want it to look. And now we move into design development, which incorporates, the different mechanical systems, how we're actually going to construct that, how we're going to build new walls, what materials we're going to use, what types of electrical systems are we putting in. We're looking at everything from hydrogen systems to turbine systems on the roof, solar. We're looking at energy producing windows. We're looking at sealants for this beautiful historic building that is it's an iconic location in the city of Chicago. So we want to preserve as much of the building as we can, because the least carbon building is one that's already built, right? So we try to avoid, whenever possible, demolition, maybe recorrecting walls within the building if we need to, or eliminating them if we need to, but what are we replacing them with? And we look at, again, all of the different sustainable materials that are available in the marketplace now. Whether you look at a company like Saint-Gobain, for example, which is an industry leader in sustainable materials and different technologies. But there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of them. Owens Corning. I mean, you can go down a very long list. I'm not trying to include or exclude anybody. Through the course of doing this, being in this industry, you spend an awful lot of time looking at these new products and these new materials, which is, it's an exciting part of what we do as developers and builders. So, yeah, there's a lot of new things coming out that allow us, different opportunities. And I think as we start to revamp these buildings in Chicago, and you start to see the major significance in energy reductions for those buildings, it's going to be very exciting. And you can look at, for example, in New York City, they have Local Law 97, which is a requirement for a lot of these buildings to transition to much more energy efficiency, reducing their carbon footprints. And people are looking at this requirement as a law, and they're, how am I going to do that? It's going to cost so much money, and they're right. It is going to cost money. But again, you have to look at it operationally as well as from a development standpoint. And if you can transition these buildings utilizing these technologies, whether it's hydrogen, that I talked about earlier. There's some companies out there now that are really going heavy into hydrogen, and they've got some fantastic systems that work and significantly reduce your energy usage and your energy costs. And they're not real expensive. You look at replacing your windows, which that in and of itself is a significant energy savings for any building. Insulation wherever possible, all of these little things that you can do that meets the requirements of Local Law 97 and all of these other new laws and regulations that are being passed throughout municipalities across the country.
If you had to, attach your horse to one of these buggies, if it was, new window technology, if it was installation, if it was, energy producing windows, which piece of technology gets Brian super excited about what the future is really going to look like?
Hydrogen.
Hydrogen.
It's an easy one. Hydrogen. Hydrogen systems, I think, as they become more mainstream and the individual infrastructures within cities are developed and allowed to expand to handle hydrogen fuels to be transported just like we transport water and gas and oil now. Hydrogen is significantly more efficient from an energy producing standpoint. It's very sustainable, and it's a technology that is going to continue to improve over the next decade or 2 decades ahead of us, to the point where it almost doesn't make sense not to do it in any building, especially a new construction that you're looking at. Why would you want your building fully on the grid when you can have it off?
I mean, this is an interesting perspective to me, which is like when we innovate in spaces like this with hydrogen, and you have a very clear way of looking at the future, why would we not use this? Why would we not take our buildings off the grid if we have access to sustainable energy? How does that position, because me and Dante are from the Las Vegas area, companies like NV Energy that literally have a chokehold on the entire energy market in the state, how are they going to be able to adjust to those type of things? Do you have any foresight on what that's going to look like for the future?
Yeah, again, very good question. I think the utility companies are starting to realize that they have to pivot the way that they're doing things as well. When you talk about, we could go back to the electrification again. It sounds like a great idea to electrify everything, but the truth of the matter is the grid couldn't handle it right now. If you were I read a study just the other day that if 50% of the people in the United States drove an electric car, our grid would collapse. It's pretty It's pretty. Electric cars do pull a lot of energy. They just
do.
do. I don't have any. I'm not. I'm not an electrical engineer. So again, what the reality of all of that is, I don't know. But there are certainly a lot of studies out there that will tell you that fully electrifying homes just is not practical right now until the grid is fixed. We need to, whether it's through renewables or whether it's through other sources of energy, and we can get a little bit, controversial on that. But we need to increase our energy production before we can reduce our energy production, is really what it comes down to. How we go about that, what types of energies we look at, that's sort of the question of the day. As administrations change, this is not I don't view it as a political thing. It's more of it's just sort of a mindset. But as administrations change, ideas come more to the forefront on how to handle these things. I think we're getting to the point where we have to sort of look at alternatives that may have scared us in the past. I look at nuclear as an example of that. There's a lot of fear about nuclear energy, and in fact, nuclear energy is the cleanest energy you can produce. People worry about, what about the remnants of it? There's again new technologies being produced. They have nuclear reactors now that fit on the back of a truck that can produce a tremendous amount of energy.
Yeah.
And they're very clean. They're easy to maintain. So, I'm not saying that it's the save-all to this problem, but I think it's something that needs to be considered, needs to be looked at. Again, we talked about hydrogen, solar, great, but there's some drawbacks to solar. I wouldn't necessarily consider them eco-friendly, but they do serve a great purpose. And I think, again, as that technology continues to become better and better, where you can produce more energy from a smaller panel as opposed to the larger panels, things along those lines, I think is going to be very important. We talked about the turbines, reducing the size of these turbines, reducing the cost and the energy use in their production. All very great things. And the more we look at them, the more these great companies out there, these tech startups are looking at them and trying to find a better mousetrap. I think we need to encourage that. And fortunately, there's a lot of investment out there in the industry right now, which has helped driving a lot of these things, which is very useful. So we find the technologies and grow these companies, and we just continue that cycle over and over again. And I think eventually we get to the point where we solve a lot of these problems.
Brian, I'd love for you to put your futurist hat on for a second. One of the things I heard recently was that, so I have a daughter, she's 3, about to turn 4. So with the amount of oil and gas, obviously we're a world that is very reliant on fossil fuels. Not necessarily her generation is going to struggle with running out of fossil fuel, but her children are going to start having to contemplate other sources of energy. How do you kind of think about this challenge that's, a multi-generational challenge sitting in this seat today?
Yeah. The great thing about history is that it teaches us that where there were shortcomings, people found a solution. And to me, that is what the future looks like. I think that we need to move away from fossil fuels because it is finite. I think that, whether you want to look at it from the standpoint of running out of the resource, or whether you want to look at it from the standpoint of pollution, we need to move away from it. But we need to be smart about it. to just all of a sudden say no more oil production is not smart, because we are a world that runs on oil and gas, and we need to acknowledge that. But also, while acknowledging that, focus on the new technologies that we need for the future. I am not afraid for my grandchildren, for the world. I am not. I'm not one of those people that believes that the earth is dying. I believe our earth is very strong, very resilient, and I think we have a great future as a planet. Doesn't mean that we need to ignore these things. It doesn't mean that we need to keep drilling oil and fracking for gas and all of these other things that we're doing. We need to continue doing them because we do need the energy to continue to survive as a species. But we also need to look at these new technologies. We need to expand on the new technologies. We need to be open to looking at new technologies and utilizing them. That's another big part of what we experience, what we come across in this industry as developers and constructors is, well, I don't know if I want to use that. It's not really tried and true yet. Let's wait a few years until, it's proven itself. We've got to be a little bit more energetic in our approach to it. We have to be a little bit more open-minded in utilizing these technologies. And there's opportunities to do it where it doesn't hurt us. If we spend the money on that, are we, and it doesn't work, do we automatically lose that money? Which is the way a developer would typically look at it. We need to look at it in a different way. We need to look at it from the standpoint of there's an opportunity to improve efficiency, and we need to take every opportunity there is to do that.
It's like having a healthy relationship with experimentation and curiosity, because you're not going to be able to figure out the new path without going down that path and obviously sometimes failing forward. Sure. You know what I mean? And so my question for you is, how do we get, the American people, this is a big question. How do we get the American people to be more curious about what these alternative forms of, energy could look like for us? We talk about hydrogen, right? But naturally people are so reactive when you talk about, the planet getting warmer, everything like that. It's just interesting how we need to be more curious rather than just taking information as it's given to us on TikTok or other things like that, because you guys see the front lines and how you guys are having an incremental impact every single day.
I think the best place to start is stop being fanatical. Stop crying wolf. Talk about it intelligently, not in a doomsday manner. Don't be critical of those that may not necessarily agree with you, but find ways to convince them and have those conversations. I was talking to a buddy of mine just last week, and we are politically polar opposites, but we got into a knockdown drag out over the recent election, but we're buddies, so we can do that. And at the end of the conversation, I said, I still love you, buddy. And he said the same thing to me. But you got to be willing to have these hard conversations and not be hateful about it, and understand that, not everybody agrees with every aspect of this doomsday scenario that's being blown out there. This is an industry, and make no mistake about it. The sustainable world is an industry. It is a business. And we need to recognize that. It's not a bad business any more than oil was a bad business or car manufacturers were a bad business. This is technology. And you talk about, how these things move. Thank God the Wright brothers didn't stop when their first plane crashed. You got to keep going. You got to find ways to improve it and continue working on it. And, and even when they were finally able to create that plane that was able to fly across the Atlantic, well, God help us if they'd stopped there.
Yeah.
It's technology grows. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. And it's why I'm not afraid for my grandkids. I think the world's going to survive. I think we're going to find our way to get through this. I think mankind is going to be lifted up because of it. I think our societies will be better and stronger because of it. And we can, even move away from a lot of these fears. Every time something happens in the Middle East, people think it's because of oil. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it is. So let's take it off the table. It's just looking at things differently and being open-minded to other ideas that maybe you might not agree with right now, but at least be willing to have a conversation about it and not, just think that the other person is horrible for not agreeing with what you believe.
As I hear you speak, Ryan, I feel like you're such a voice of reason, especially in this space that can kind of seem obscure to some who aren't, hip to all the things that are going on in renewable energy and just the energy space in general. I'm curious your take on the importance of leaders like yourself being able to have a platform and talking on podcasts and things like that to educate the rest of the world on how important these aspects of society are.
Well, it's a great opportunity. I think a lot of times we spend our days in our bubbles, and we deal with the day-to-day things, the minute-by-minute things that occur, whether we're as business leaders or whether we're as grunts down in the trenches digging the ditches. We're so focused on what we're doing that we forget that sometimes there's a message that needs to get out there. Sometimes you need to talk about the things that you're finding and seeing, and being willing to put it out there, to go on and talk about it. Again, remove the hysteria, because it doesn't help. But be able to have those debates and conversations, and to have a platform like a podcast or any type of interview type scenario that allows you to talk about it in those ways, I think is great for the industry. It's great for the country. It's great for the world.
So, Brian, I have a question for you. If you had the opportunity to know that everything that you're setting out for in the future you're going to accomplish, it's an absolute guarantee, right? And we could spend 5 minutes with that 90-year-old version of Brian. What advice would he give to this guy who sits across this table from us today on how he's going to navigate from where we are to being 90 years old and accomplishing everything? What advice would you give to him as he goes through that journey?
Open your ears and open your eyes. Look at what's going on in the world. Pay attention to it. Be participatory in it. I see too many people on a daily basis that don't want to know what's going on outside their windows. And everything affects us, whether it's, pending tariffs that might impact our economy, whether it's foreign governments that are looking to spread their wings, whether it's internal folks that have their own agendas that may not be in tune with what we're trying to achieve as a society. Pay attention to what's going on around you and get involved in it. Listen to other people. Be willing to be open-minded about things. And I think if you're willing to learn, it gets us all to a much better place. And I'll be the first to tell you, I spent a lot of years with my ears blocked and my eyes closed. Just sort of focus on the way things have always been done. This is the way I've always done it. So it's always worked in the past. And it may continue working, but that doesn't mean there's not a better way to do it. And I tell our folks all the time, okay, the worst thing that anybody can say to me is, well, I've always done it that way. The second worst thing anybody can say to me is, well, that's not my job. Okay. Both of those I wouldn't say they'll put me into a tirade, but I will say that they probably will have a very stern discussion about it, because those are two of the most false statement any individual can make. And I don't care what your job is, but everything affects you. And everything that you come across is a part of your job. And it's your responsibility as a human to get involved in it and to try and do your best to fix whatever you can.
Brian, what would you say your advice is for young leaders, young founders who are in the space, maybe listening to this, to stay grounded during this journey? We love to say that this is a marathon, especially the world of business. You can play this game for quite a long time. So what's your advice to the younger generation?
Wow, you guys ask some really good questions. That I would say, my advice would be to think outside of yourself more and to realize that there is a world out there that does not completely revolve around you, and to be open to helping others, be open to finding new ways of doing things, and most importantly, to be open to the fact that you can play a significant role in society without having to be that person that everybody looks at. Okay? You don't need to gain attention just for attention's sake. Focus on things outside of yourself, and you'll be much more successful.
The last question that we have for you here on the podcast, Brian, is a tradition where our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question. Okay. Now, knowing that we are all kind of in the space of innovation, what are the most important characteristics of a leader going into 2025 and 2026 to help their organization accomplish their mission?
Current president excluded, humility.
There you go.
Humility is important. Strength of character. Know that your integrity is your greatest asset. And believe in yourself, believe in your abilities, but don't let those abilities go to your head. Lift other people up along the way, because that's what a leader does. A leader is not there to stand and point fingers and direct and take the credit for everything. A leader that does that is not a good leader. I would not even call him a leader. A leader is somebody that knows how to maximize other people's potential. And it's also somebody who surrounds themselves with people way smarter than them. And I've got a whole bunch of those people around me. So,
well, Brian, can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast, man. Being able to surround ourselves with people who are much smarter and more experienced than we are is truly a joy of what we get to do on a daily basis, man. We can't thank you for everybody who's tuning in, watching, and listening to come into the show, man. Really appreciate your time.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys very much. Real pleasure.